By the time the water stopped moving, the tide had already turned red, not from the sand, not from the sea, from the bodies of women who had walked into the surf wearing nurses' uniforms and Red Cross armbands. They had no weapons, they had already surrendered, and they were shot from behind. February 16th, 1942, Raji Beach, Bangka Island, in what is now Indonesia. 22 women stepped into the water. 21 never came back out. Only one survived. Her name was Sister Vivian Bullwinkle. She was 26 years old. A single bullet passed through her body, entering her left side and exiting through her back. It missed every vital organ. She fell face down into the sea and did not move. Japanese soldiers waded among the bodies, finishing the wounded with bayonets. Bullwinkle lay still, floating among her colleagues. She did not breathe. She did not cry out. For more than an hour she waited, pretending to be dead. Then, when the soldiers finally left, she crawled out of the water alone. But the massacre at Raji Beach contained another secret. A secret that remained buried for decades, before the machine gun fired, before the women walked into the surf. Something else had happened on that beach, something the only survivor was ordered never to speak about. The fall of Singapore. The story begins 4 days earlier, February 12th, 1942. Singapore was collapsing. Japanese forces had advanced down the Malay Peninsula in just 70 days, one of the fastest military campaigns of the Second World War. British defences were crumbling. The city was burning. More than 130,000 Allied soldiers would soon become prisoners of war in the largest surrender in British military history. At the docks, 65 Australian Army nurses from the 2nd 13th Australian General Hospital were ordered to evacuate. They boarded a small passenger ship called the SS Viner, Brooke. The vessel was overcrowded. Wounded soldiers, civilians, women and children filled every available space. Among them was Sister Vivian Bullwinkle. She had been born in South Australia in 1915. She trained as a nurse in Broken Hill. In 1941, she volunteered for the Australian Army Nursing Service. She was 26 years old. On February 12th, the Viner Brooke left Singapore. 2 days later, Japanese bombers found it in the Bangka Strait. The attack was devastating. Bombs struck the ship directly. Within minutes, it began to sink. 2 nurses were killed in the bombing. The rest were thrown into the ocean, survivors in the water. For hours, survivors drifted in open water. Some clung to wreckage, others held on to each other. Through the night, small groups washed ashore on different parts of Bangka Island. Vivian Bullwinkle reached Raji Beach with 21 other nurses. They were not alone. Several wounded Allied soldiers and a few civilians also reached the shore. Everyone was exhausted. Some were injured. None had weapons. There was little food, no water. They had only one realistic option. They would surrender. Under international law, nurses were non-combatants. Their Red Cross armbands clearly marked them as medical personnel. They believed they would be treated as prisoners of war. The first executions. On the morning of February 16th, a Japanese patrol arrived at the beach. The soldiers separated the group. Men on stretchers and wounded soldiers were taken around a rocky headland. The nurses remained on the beach. Soon afterward, they heard the sound of a machine gun. Then silence. The soldiers returned. The nurses understood what had happened, but worse was still coming. The soldiers sat down nearby. They cleaned their weapons. And the hours that followed became the darkest part of the story. For decades, the details remained hidden. A buried truth, Vivian Bullwinkle, survived the massacre. But when the war ended and war crimes investigations began, she was given instructions. She could describe the execution. She could testify about the machine gun. But she was not to describe what had happened beforehand. The order came from her own government. For years, the official record mentioned only the shooting. The rest was left unsaid. Historians would later uncover fragments of the missing story. Physical evidence, witness statements, accounts from investigators, all pointing to the same conclusion. Before the execution, the nurses were assaulted. The details were never included in Bullwinkle's official testimony at the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal in 1947. She followed orders, and the secret remained hidden. The walk into the water. After the assault, a Japanese officer gave another order. The nurses and one civilian woman were told to stand. They were instructed to walk into the sea. still wearing their uniforms, still wearing their Red Cross armbands. They walked in together. When the water reached their waists, they stopped. Behind them, soldiers prepared a machine gun. Then the firing began. Bullets tore through the group. Women fell forward into the surf. Vivian Bullwinkle was hit once. The bullet passed through her body. She collapsed into the water. Around her, the sea filled with blood. 21 women died there. Bullwinkle remained motionless among them. Eventually the soldiers left. Only then did she move. Survival Bullwinkle crawled from the water and reached the beach. She found a wounded British soldier hiding nearby. His name was Private Cecil Kingsley. For 12 days, she cared for him using almost no medical supplies. But his condition worsened. Eventually they decided to surrender. Shortly afterward, Kingsley died. Bullwinkle was taken prisoner. For the next 3.5 years, she remained in Japanese captivity in Sumatra. She never told her captors she had survived the WWII Beach Massacre. If they had known she was the witness, she would likely have been killed. Even among fellow prisoners, she spoke carefully. The nurses who survived captivity protected her secret. They promised each other that one day the world would know what happened. After the war, when the war ended in 1945, investigations began. Bullwinkle was called to testify at the International Military Tribunal for the Far East in Tokyo. There she described the massacre. She described the machine gun. She described watching her colleagues die in the water. But she did not describe the events that happened before the shooting. She had been ordered not to. The attackers were never identified. No one was charged for the WWII Beach Massacre. The official record remained incomplete. A life after war. After returning to Australia, Vivian Bullwinkle resumed her career in nursing. She became Director of Nursing at Fairfield Hospital in Melbourne. She later served on the Council of the Australian War Memorial. Throughout her life, she worked to preserve the memory of the nurses who died at WWII Beach. In 1992, she returned to Banker Island. There, she helped unveil a memorial honouring the women who were killed. She accepted recognition on behalf of the others, but rarely spoke about herself. For decades, the deeper truth of the massacre remained largely unknown. The secret revealed. Before she died in 2000, Bullwinkle shared the full story in a private interview with Australian broadcaster Tess Lawrence. She explained that she had wanted to reveal everything during the war crimes trials, but she'd been instructed not to. The burden stayed with her for nearly 60 years. The hidden details began to surface slowly. In 2019, historian Lynette Silver published the book Angels of Mercy. The research brought together multiple pieces of evidence: witness, accounts, forensic analysis of Bullwinkle's preserved uniform, documents connected to wartime investigations. Together they confirmed what had long been suspected. The assault had occurred, and it had been deliberately excluded from the official record. Remembering WWII Beach. The women who walked into the water that morning were not anonymous victims. They were nurses, professionals trained to save lives. They had survived the sinking of their ship. They had helped the wounded through the night, and when they faced the soldiers on the beach, they believed their Red Cross uniforms would protect them. They were wrong. Matron Irene Drummond, Sister Elaine Balfour Ogden, Sister Mickey Farmer, Sister Pat Gunther, Sister Blanche Hempstead, and many others. 21 women who walked into the surf together. They died in one of the most brutal war crimes committed against medical personnel during the Second World War. The only witness, Vivian Bullwinkle, was the only one who came out of the water alive. For nearly 6 decades, she carried a story she had been told not to tell. She honoured that order for most of her life, but before she died, she made sure the truth would eventually emerge. 77 years after the massacre at WWII Beach, the hidden parts of the story finally became public. The women who died there were not just victims of war, they were witnesses, and the world now knows what happened to them.